what you just said?
I'm Dustin. I don't like talking very much, and so I have the tendency of talking very unclearly. And so if you don't understand something I'm saying, feel free to ask me to say it again, or if I'm talking very quickly, tell me to slow down, because I will. But I work at CRRC, and I work on policy analysis, and I spend a lot of my days in R sometimes, and then sometimes I don't see it for a few weeks. But the happy days are in R. Today was a happy day where I got to do a lot of modeling in R. But I guess it's important to say I'm not a programmer in any way, shape, or form. I don't have any computer science education. I know how to make things work in R from having to make things work in R for me when I'm doing data analysis more as a social scientist. So some of the technical things, I probably will not give you a satisfying explanation if you have a question when it comes to R. When it comes to some of the statistics, I should be better. And if I'm not, shame on me. So I'm going to talk about doing election statistics or election forensics in R. And first talk about theory and tests and go on to implementing them in R. And then there's a way if you don't know how to use R at all to actually do this stuff online. It's just that you lose the ability to customize what you're doing. So what I'm showing you will be with 99% confidence intervals and 20,000 boots instead of 95% confidence intervals, 4,000 boots, and little details like that that might matter to you. But if they don't matter to you and you just want to do election forensics, which I guess this room isn't so much, then yeah, you can do it online. So what's election forensics, right? The basic idea is that when people manipulate numbers, there's sort of a pattern left over. Somebody's fingerprint is left there. And a lot of the ideas for election forensics originally came from forensic accounting. Is anyone familiar with forensic accounting? Yeah?
Don't ask me how to do it, I know what it is.
What is it, right?
Forensic accounting is sifting through financial data to catch. It's basically exploratory in theory. It's to catch patterns, to detect fraud, mostly. I mean, that's why it was really sort of created, was to detect fraud.
Yeah.
Risk of fraud, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. So with all statistics, right, we're talking about probabilities and we're talking about something that's probabilistic. We're not talking about certitude. But with election forensics and with financial things, with accounting, forensic accounting, the idea is if there's this funny pattern, then we should go and see what happened. And that's the basic idea behind election forensics. There's a lot of tests that have been done, but today I'm just going to go over some tests of turnout. And while there's 6 tests up there, I'm going to talk mainly about 2. I'm going to talk about the one that makes the most intuitive sense, and I'm going to talk about the one that makes the least sense for most people at first sight, and then slowly starts to make sense because I might have to explain it, and I've had to try to explain it 1,000 times, and I'm going to see if I can do any better tonight, which I sadly doubt I will, but it's worth a shot. The other tests, they're tests of the distribution beside of turnout, and that's what the dip test, so aptly named there, is. So the mean of the last digit. The last digit in any number that has, well, just in any number actually for that, what would you think it would be between 0 and 9 if you generate a list of random numbers and you look at the distribution of the last digit in that number, what would you think each number, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 would have?
The distribution?
Yeah, how many zeros would there be? How many ones? How many twos? How many threes? How many fours? No. In a naturally generated list.
Oh, naturally.
Yeah, so just flatlined, exactly. So this guy over here, Ryan, right? Yeah. You expect each digit, the last one, to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10% of the time. And so to demonstrate this, let's see if this is working. I hope it is. Oh, no, back over, okay. So, can you make it bigger? Let me try. this second screen thing, which I only learned about a few minutes ago. So here's a list of numbers, which we're calling y. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
Can
right?
you increase the font size actually for this
Oh, yeah, let's see. Oh, this is going to be hard like this.
If not, it's
You guys, I don't remember exactly how to do it. There's definitely one.
Yeah.
Both streets.
Global options.
Go to account. Font. There you go.
Let's see. Okay. So. We have a list of numbers, right? And now this code, what it's doing is it say sample 1,000,000 times from that list, 0 to 9. So, already done. What should the mean be? Any guesses?
The mean of the last digit?
Yeah, the
Or
mean
the
of this
digit.
randomly sampled list of numbers that's 1,000,000 digits long, but all the numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9.
I mean, it'd be 5.
No?
I mean, if you take
What's
10%.
so 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4?
4.5.
Exactly. It should be about 4.5. I just did that. Let's see what it turns out. So 4.49879. Pretty close. Yeah?
Cool. Yeah.
It's not exactly 4.5, but the theory is, in math-wise, as it approaches infinity, it would go to 4.5. So let's see if
So does the sample have the requirements of it, or like the characteristics of the distribution written into it, or it's just
so for that one, I was just demonstrating the idea, but the characteristics of the distribution, what you do is you test for a value. So a theoretically expected value is, no, this isn't up. So the theoretically expected value in this case is 4.5, right? And then your question is, well, how close is it? Is it close enough or is it not close enough, right? And so basically you're asking the question, how can we get a range of values to tell if this is significantly different or not significantly different from this value that we've seen in reality? So, well, that's the actual distribution. Okay, so in R, and the idea here is that, once again, if the last digit has a strange number, a strange distribution, then we ask ourselves, well, maybe this is something that was man-manipulated. And so, where's this guy? Sorry about this. So here's, this is a last digit getter function that I wrote, or no, that Walter Medding wrote, and then I modified a little bit. And then here's the proportionalist results. And let's look at the mean. 4.45 is the mean of all of the last digits in the 2012 proportional results at the precinct level.
So it was all fine.
Well, is it? That's the question, right? And so how do you figure out whether it was fine or wasn't fine? Bootstrapping. Do you guys know bootstrapping? A little bit? Okay. Really quickly. The idea is, it comes from survey research. I burped on camera. But, so, the idea comes from survey research, and you take a random sample of the population, and it's then representative of the public, right? Yes?
Sure.
Okay. Ideally, right? And then you have that, and then you want to figure out how much error you have in it. And you have this random sample, And so you want to resample that sample and see how different it could have been if you randomly select from this sample to get another sample. And then you want to do that 10 to 20,000 more times. And then by doing that 10 to 20,000 more times, you get a range of values that it could have fallen by chance. So it basically entirely rests on random sampling, and if you believe that random sampling gives you something that's representative. And does that make sense to people? It's a poor explanation, as I mentioned, but.
So you choose different resamples 10,000 times, and you compare that each time. You compare that resample to the sample.
Well, what you do is you take the range of resamples that you get. So for this one, we're taking the average, right? And so I take 20,000 resamples in my case and look at the range of how far those averages were. And then I take 99% of them, and it gives me something called 99% confidence intervals. And it says that 99% of the time it's going to be within this range of values, is the idea.
So you're taking the range within 99%.
Exactly.
And you do that for each.
You
one.
do it, yeah. So you start out with like a list of election returns. So let me get R back up. So here, what I'm doing, this is what's called, so in R, the bootstrapping package, if anyone's used it before, you need to have an index for whatever statistic you use. And you're not necessarily going to have an index for basic functions like mean and things like that. And so this code is just to do that and put an index inside of a function. So it's mean fun, I hope. So here, this is the boot. And so what this is doing, this line of code, we have the election results, right? There's 3,700 precincts or so. And I extracted the last digit, right? And so it's saying, take that last digit, calculate the average for 20,000 times this resampled. And so since there's 3,900 or so, it generates a list that's 3,900 long, and then does that 20,000 times. And this gives me a bunch of lists, basically. It does the booting. So it's mildly computationally, I didn't load the package. It takes a little bit of time to do. This one's not too bad. Perfect. So does that stuff make sense to everyone? Sort of? Okay. What I just did is what I basically did was take a list, and I made 20,000 lists of numbers from resampling the precinct list that we saw in reality.
Right.
So we saw this in reality. These are the last digits. Made the average, right? And then 20,000 more times, made 20,000 more lists from resampling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me if something doesn't make sense. There's no stupid questions, only the stupid presenter.
What is the purpose of bootstrapping?
To generate an interval, so you know how much error you have, basically.
The confidence interval.
The confidence intervals, which is the next step. But to sort of go off of that, the question we're trying to answer with election forensics is, we have this value, 4.45, right? And we'd expect 4.5, but how far from the reality is it? Is that something that's suspicious, or is it something that we'd expect?
Okay.
And so this range, if it doesn't include that 4.5, then maybe we think it's suspicious. And so that's what this code is doing. It takes that list that was generated up there, and now it's going to run for 5 minutes maybe, and it's taking the list and then generating averages from that, and then seeing how far the range is.
So in other words, if whatever this mean was that we calculated, 4.555 or something, if none of the calculated means that we're getting now are include that
If the range
number,
doesn't
if the
include it?
ranges of those don't include that number, then it's suspicious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It comes from accounting, actually, this one. Yeah. All right, so while that's running, I'm going to go back to talking about maybe anybody? I'm going to. All right, so there's something called a 0-5 distribution test. I'm just going to quickly go through the other tests while that's running. And the 0-5 distribution test, it's also the last digit, but the idea behind it is that people, if they're trying to credibly say, so let's imagine that I'm a politician and you're my agent, right? I'm paying you to fix the elections, and I need some way to know that you actually fixed the elections. I want you to show me that there's a 5 at the end of every single electoral return in that precinct, okay? And the theory here is that if people do this, and they found it like in old American Chicago style voting patterns in the precincts, and they found it in South Africa and Bangladesh, and there's some other places where there's just like weird digit distributions. It's just lots and lots of zeros for no apparent reason. Then this suggests that someone's trying to signal that they did their job and rigged the elections. This is one test. You'd expect this to be 20% of the overall distribution, so 0s and 5s to be 20% of the last digits in the entire thing overall.
Why 0s and 5s are the most common flags?
Because mental things. The other
The
things,
psychology of it, you mean?
yeah, the psychology of it. But actually, so this morning I was reading the guy who's reviewing my report right now, and he's like the world leader in this kind of stuff. He suggested that 2s and 7s would be a good test because when you're trying to generate a random number, you're statistically more likely to think that 2 or 7 is a random number, and so people may do that more often. Yeah.
Why not just do or look at the distribution of each?
You can.
Possible.
So some people do that. I think looking at every single digit, it's a little bit much because you get into multiple testing then. And so your multiple testing, you can use a multiple testing correction, but then you're not going to necessarily find something. So a multiple testing correction, each time you do a test, the chances of you finding something by chance increases by the chance that it wasn't the first time. So you're getting a larger number. And so you adjust it down to say that I'm not going to take that. I'm going to expect a higher level of significance to be this. If you do that enough times, what you get is that it becomes very, very difficult to suggest that there's any fraud or that there's anything abnormal in this distribution. And if you don't do it, then you also end up with multiple testing problems.
So basically, with this one, you take, let's say, two numbers, either 0 and 5 or 2 and 7, and you know that in theory they should occur about 20% of the time, and so you're looking at occurrences of greater than 20%.
Yeah, exactly. Also using bootstrapped confidence intervals for this.
So, oh,
What? Yeah.
Why don't you do just, I don't know, chi-square testing or something?
So-
Or maybe thing?
Chi-square testing is incredibly sensitive to power, and because so once you get like, do you work with survey data at all?
Sorry, no.
Okay. So the example I usually give is survey data and weights. So you can weight data to say that there's 3 million Georgians, right? 0.01% change or difference will be significant. And with this, you want to, my opinion, and this is something that people talk about a lot, and it's you want to be a little bit more conservative. And you want to say, well, this test, it goes off a lot, so I'm going to take a harder test. But if this harder test goes off still, then I have a lot stronger argument. I can say, This test's not going to go off all that often, and it's going off. Something suspicious is happening. But originally, forensic accounting did use a chi-square. Yeah. So. Dip test? Anyone know the dip test? Alright, this is sort of a funny mathematical one that made its way into elections about 10 years ago. Unimodal distribution. Basically that there's one tip at the top, right? This is a test of whether there's one mode, multiple modes, or no modes. And it tells you with a p-value, if it's greater than 0.05, what happens is it means that there's multiple modes or no modes. And then you can look at the distribution and say this has no modes, multiple modes. So why would it be something that's suspicious? Generally, you can say there's lots of normally distributed things in nature, but also just thinking practically, why would there be, for example, in Georgia, so there would be 37 districts that had exactly the same turnout, basically, is what a no-mode distribution would be. So if you look at turnout, there's 37 with 0%, 37 with 1%, 37 with 2%, 37 with 3%. That would be a non-modal distribution. And that would be a little bit strange if you had a perfectly equal distribution of all of these things, right? Then, why not bimodal? Well, in some circumstances, this may make sense. And the other thing about all of these tests is you have to use substantive judgment, right? That's what we were saying at the beginning, where you have to sort of look at this and say, does it make sense? If people were boycotting the election, right? Let's say Western Georgia decided to boycott the 2012 elections. No one came to vote. So you'd have a bunch of districts at this one mode of 0% or 0.1%. And then this other one where there's a higher turnout, right? That would lead to a bimodal distribution, where 50% of people go here and no one goes here. And so maybe that makes sense. But generally speaking, in most clean elections, in normal circumstances where you're not getting an election boycott or things like this, there's a more or less unimodal distribution. About 40% of people, 50% of people turn out in most places, and there's slightly less outliers here and slightly less outliers here as you go towards 0 and 100. And so this tests if there's anything strange there. So this test goes off in Russian elections all the time, because Russian elections sort of, if you look at the distribution, somebody want to throw me the marker? No, there's a marker, never mind. This is what a Russian elections distribution looks like usually. It's so, yeah, you get like these strange numbers that, yeah, which it's not even a good logarithmic curve or anything like that. It's just wacky who can get this, who can get that is the explanation. That also, it's a pattern that turns out in old Chicago machine politics in the United States when the Democrats were running the city and like pumping out the vote in certain precincts. You know, well?
Yeah, sorry. I was just curious, like, if you have a statistician, somebody experienced in these sort of things, rigging the election, then couldn't they make sure that none of these tests actually work?
So I guess it was, so the guy who like did a lot of work to really build up these tests, he actually had that experience. So he was in Russia giving a talk about these methods, and the Central Election Commission asked him to come by and like explain like what he was doing. And then the next elections, the data was perfectly smooth. Like there is a perfect bell curve, which is also really suspicious, right? That's actually another way of testing for data falsification, especially in survey research nowadays. So do you guys remember the scandal with, not Gerber, Green, and the graduate student? There was a This American Life story about a field experiment. And it was about how you could talk to people for 5 minutes and that would change their mind about homosexuality for life. There's this guy who was at Berkeley and he loved the study and he started looking at the data and it was perfectly distributed, more or less with like little dots basically, so a little bit of noise. And then he extracted the noisy dots that weren't, and if you looked at the error term, it was exactly normally distributed. So that's actually another really good way of testing. So if it's too close to reality, if it's too good to be true, it's usually a good sign that it is.
So it's, in other words, it's really hard to fake the election and also make it undetectable?
Well, it's not really hard. If you're smart enough, you can do it. Why not, you know? But I don't know, a lot of people, in the places where you get the worst of it, people don't really care that much. Like, in Russia's sense, like, this last election, they just didn't really care enough to try and fix it. 2 elections ago, they did though. And so all of these tests showed nothing, which is weird because you would expect some tests to actually go off by chance. So with 99% confidence intervals, you'd expect 1 in 100 tests to go off and say that something suspicious was happening. Yeah. All right. Skew and kurtosis. These are also under the assumption that there's a unimodal distribution. You can get rough values of 0 and 3 for them, is what you would expect. And you can also test this using bootstrapping. Let's see. So let's check in with, where's my mouse? Okay. So if you're doing this, don't worry about the studentized intervals. You don't need it for this. So this normal just means it's the basic bootstrapping that's non-parametric, and that's what you use for this by, I don't know, historical standard, but the guy who developed them, these tests at least, he's a statistician, so I trust him. And so we see that this range, it covers 4.5, which is what we would expect without manipulation. So this test doesn't look suspicious to us, is basically what that says.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect a little bit of going back and forth, because I mean, it's chance, right? Like, chance is involved in everything, in every distribution of actual numbers. I mean, a computer-generated set of numbers doesn't have it so much, and yeah, if you set a seed, you can predict what it is, but...
By experience, what was suspect range?
What?
By your experience, you had some suspect range?
Yeah, I'm not showing any tonight, but half of the tests that I did for this last election in 2012 went off. And I want to play with the majoritarian voting because I'm guessing that, so you can do this for any single election, right? So you can take every majoritarian race in every single district as an election and then start running the tests. And it would be interesting to see what happens in a few places that are known to have suspicious voting results and things like that. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that there would be a fair number of strange-looking tests in the majoritarian races this year. So, all right, those are the straightforward tests. Now, I'm gonna go to the one that's not so straightforward. Are there any questions before I do that? Cool. So, has anyone heard of Benford's Law? Yeah. Basically, the idea is that, oh, I have it right there. So, in naturally occurring numbers, they increase by 1 regularly. The first digit is more likely to be 1 than 2, 2 than 3, 3 than 4, 4 than 5, 5 than 6, 6 than 7, and so on, right? And this doesn't make any sense if you're a math-minded person at first, right? Because you're saying, well, it should be randomly distributed, it should be 10%, 10%, 10%, 10% each number. But if you think about it more sort of intuitively, then it sort of makes sense because it's a naturally generated number, naturally in quotes, of course. So if you have a number between 1 and 199, what are the chances that you're going to get that first number, the first digit in the number starts with 1? between 1 and 199 if you choose randomly any number.
1 and 100.
Around 50%.
Hundreds of times over 200.
Yeah, over 199. So
160.
it's
That's
50.
a lot, yeah.
It's 56%.
Just take probability.
Yeah,
Pure probability.
pure probability. It's 56%. Then, all right. So you do that with 1 to 299. The first digit's roughly going to be, I think, 34, 35%. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that video. And then you keep on doing this, right? And so a 9 ends up being, if you do this 1 to 999, you still have a chance that the first number, the first digit in the number, is going to be about 11% 1. And then with naturally occurring numbers, they gradually increase, right? And so what this guy Benford did is he took the average of all of those probabilities and he added them up, he averaged them, and what he came to is this distribution. So 30.1% is likely to be, the first digit is 1, the second digit's likely to be 2, 17.6% of the time, and so on. So, I don't know, I'm a very empirical person and I don't believe anything unless you can actually show it. And what he did, he looked at the weights of atoms, the lengths of rivers, I think, what was the other, the populations of towns and countries, and it works with YouTube video hits as well, I guess. There's one guy that I watched on YouTube when I was learning about this, and he did it with his YouTube numbers, like the views on all of his posts, and it worked. And so it works. It's weird. It works though. Since then, the Benford thought of this in 1938. He published the first paper on it. So accountants said, well, we want this one test, but accountants were using the chi-squared test, right? And they hadn't thought of using bootstrapping until maybe 2000. And so they're getting lots of false positives, where they're going and auditing people and saying, well, this is like, looks suspicious, and finding out it's not. And so they wanted more than one measure. And what they did is they came up with the second digit test. And so they looked at this distribution, and then figured out what the distribution of the second digit in a number should be if it has 3 digits or more. And so it's a much smaller distribution, and you can see how a chi-squared test would be really, really close, right? Because it's 12%, 11.4%, 10.9%, 10.4%, 10%, and so on, talking about hundreds. With high-powered testing, that would go off like that. Is everyone with me so far? Okay. I'm doing better than I've ever done with this, but that's still not good enough, I guess. So, the blue bar is the expected distribution, and the orange bar is what we actually saw in 2012 proportional list results. So, you get the
Georgian
zero.
elections, right?
Yeah, Georgian elections. This was, yeah.
Sorry, I can't see. Yeah, axis. It's. Oh.
Sorry. So the orange bar is what we actually see. And we can see that it's not exactly the same, right? But the question is, how close is it, right? So based on this distribution of numbers, the 12%, 14, 11%, 10.9%, we can figure out what the average should be of the numbers that are in the second digit. So it's 4.17830 is what the average of all of the second digits in the election precinct return should be. Okay?
I'm not with you.
Okay. Do you remember the last time that it was supposed to be 4.5 when you had the average? So this is a slightly different distribution, right?
Yeah.
So if you take the average based on this distribution of numbers 0 through 9, what you get is 4.17830. Eric, you seem like you have a question, but first, does that make sense? No? Yeah?
It makes sense.
You are suspecting that it was took place really.
Yeah.
In reality. And I don't see axis.
So the y-axis, it's zeros, ones, twos, threes, fours, fives, and so on the x-axis. And this is just the percent of distribution. Sorry about that. Everyone else? Good, bad? Questions?
Basically, what you're saying is that where the other one would balance off, like, sort of, you know, if you were to balance this off, it would be slightly off from what would, like previously it was 4.5. In this particular case, if we take this distribution and find like the sort of the balancing point, it would be 4.17.
1783. Yeah, exactly. And our question is, how different from reality is it? So the expected value is 4.1873. What we saw in 2012 was 4.28. And the confidence intervals, 4.149, yeah. Just barely, it's by 300ths or 3,000ths, I forget, that it passes this 99% confidence interval. So it just barely makes it and says that it's not fraudulent. That though, something to keep in mind, these are bootstrapped confidence intervals, so there is a little bit of randomness involved. So if I ran that test right now, I'm not sure it would give me the exact same number. I might get something that says that there was fraud.
How many runs do you have?
20,000 boots. So comes out to, yeah, it's a pretty good.
So if it was really close, then you'd want to run it 100,000 boots instead, or something
So,
like that. Get a better, more accurate confidence interval.
Yeah, that will give you basically the same number, but when it's on the borderline, it can go just a little bit that way and a little bit that way in practice. And so if I was dishonest as a researcher, I could just run this over and over to get a number that I wanted to say, and say, oh, it didn't go off, or oh, it went off, if it's close. But I'm not doing that, and that actually makes my life slightly more difficult. I have to talk to politicians about this soon. Well, if it goes to 95%, yeah.
97?
97, yeah. The reason why 95 and 99 is it's just like standard and.
Just pick your P today. So this is, it fell within what, 1200ths of the range. So I mean, is that what you're saying? Is it just inside the?
Yeah, it's just barely like
But it's still
by the teeniest, tiniest hair, and if I ran it 2 more times, one of the results would say something different probably.
Why is it just inside? Because aren't we looking at the observed value within the confidence intervals? And
So the observed goes inside of this, it fits in, but the expected value is just barely more than this. So it's 0.049 is slightly less than 0.087. It's about 0.03.
What's more important, that the observed value falls within the confidence interval, or that the expected value falls within the confidence?
The expected value, So if the observed value doesn't fall inside of the confidence interval, something extremely strange happened and you should look at your code. Because
by mathematically it should just do that. But
yeah.
what we're trying to see is whether or not the expected value falls within the
Yeah. So if you did it like 5 times, then it might not happen. But if you did it a reasonable number, the minimum, most people when they're just doing this at home for social science fun, they do 500 boots. For publishable values, you do about 10,000 boots. And it starts to take up computer time. So running these 6 tests, really running the 5, I would go, there's an i7 processor on this little computer in that kitchen, and I would sit there and wait for about an hour while looking at my other computer for the results to come out.
Just to clarify, when you say boots, you mean like resamples?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to see the rest of the code, or terribly bored?
Show us. Show us the magic.
Okay. So that's the actual value. We went through that. So this is a function. It's from Mebane. It extracts the second digit. Does the code make sense to anyone who wants to make it make sense?
So it's the second issue.
Yeah, exactly. Alright. So for the 0-5 test, right? Instead of doing a chi-square distributional test, what we do is see if there's more 0s and 5s than expected. So to do that, we generate a dummy variable with 0 and 5 as 1, and then everything else is 0. And if the distribution is there, is the correct number, the average should be 0.2. If it's 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%. Also, the test for kurtosis and mean, you have to put an index into them because the standard function doesn't work. And here,
When you say index, do you mean like just a number that like
placeholder.
placeholder?
That's my understanding of it. That's a programming thing where I've never been given a good explanation of what it is in R, but they just say you need an index, and then I say, okay, I'll put an index in.
And generally, an index is it's the place in a list.
Yeah.
It's the number that identifies the place in a list of a value.
That makes a lot of sense.
So if you have like a grocery list,
Yeah.
you have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your limit.
Yeah.
So, but here it's just saying that the function needs it, but it doesn't really matter.
The booting function needs it. So normally it wouldn't need it. Like when you make a mean function, it doesn't care. But inside of this, for whatever reason, it does. And so those lines of code that are above kurtosis fun, mean fun, and skew fun are the exact same things as the basic function in R for kurtosis, skew, and mean, except that there's an extra index added into the function, like a place for. Okay. And bootstrapping starts. Those are the various tests, and
Are you running all of them right now? Or
yeah.
just one?
So I haven't loaded my packages properly. That is interesting. Not sure what's happening there. To be perfectly honest.
So you're doing bootstrapping for each of the different tests, or sort of.
Yeah.
And what is then the last two are again for the last digit mean that what you did before as well, or
So, yeah, the one's the last digit mean. This is how I had it actually organized in my work file, and I copied and pasted from it. I threw this together pretty quickly. The 0-5 mean is also looking at the last digit.
yeah.
And Then, as mentioned earlier, you just put the boot object inside, set the confidence intervals. Dip test. Very simple.
The geos turnout has to turn out for what open precincts.
Yeah.
So basically, you're just throwing that in and seeing, you know, whether or not it's 100 or 200.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a standard function in the test?
It's inside of, I think it's actually has its own package called dip. So there's a package called dip test. And yeah,
What was the geosub again?
GeoSub is the data set. So in order to have, so Benford's law, one of the technicalities that I sort of skipped over with it is if you have a list of numbers 1 to 100, or no, 20 to 11 to 100, the odds, 11 to 99, the odds of the first digit are exactly the same as the last digit, more or less. It's slightly different. So you need 3 digits, or the second digit will be exactly the same because it's only 2 digits. And so it's at the same time the second digit and the last digit. And so what the GeoSub is, it's a subsetted file that excluded all the precincts, which is about, I think, 100 precincts, which don't have what we would call a second digit that's not a last digit.
Okay.
Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, so that's the data set that you actually took from someone.
Yeah,
You-
so I got the data set from a colleague who got it from the CEC for 2012. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
You only run these programs on the local computer. You can rent some cloud service and
Yeah, I know.
works very well with Spark cluster, Hadoop or Mesos environment, and it will be really fast. You can produce really deep tests.
Yeah, no, I understand, but yeah. I mean,
It
this
will be amazing.
this works quick enough. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't mind. Like, I wasn't using this computer actually. I was using one in there, which is much quicker, but still. So running, I needed to run 6 tests. It took about an hour, and it's really those 5 tests that took about an hour. If I wanted to do it on the majoritarians, I'd take maybe a day, and I'd just leave it running, and then
Then it's okay.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's computationally heavy for social science, not for computer science or real science.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can do it for majorities. It's really interesting. You haven't done yet elections 2016, yeah?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Sounds touching.
It's, it'll be a report in a week or two. This guy who came up with some of this code, he's a computer scientist and so he teaches statistics and political science at University of Michigan, and he came up with a lot of this. He's looking at it to make sure that I didn't screw anything up, which I'm sure he'll find something. What, I don't know. But yeah. Yeah, I'll add that error. There's another error that I caught in my code at another point too, which changed the results. So that 4.28 was not 4.28 because of that error. But I've looked at the code probably 20 times now, 30 times, and I'm pretty sure everything's correct. Yeah. But so maybe 2 weeks. But actually the quality, at least of the protocols, in the end, was better in 2016 than it was in 2012. So they amended them a lot. They amended them a whole lot, but in 2012, the protocols, if you look at them, there's some places where there's like, well, foreign precincts, for example, it looks like there's a few thousand extra votes that I think it was 33,000 votes that didn't get counted, but it's probably because they sloppily recorded the protocols. And there's a bunch of other things like that that are smaller within Georgia, and those numbers are 90% smaller in 2016. So the election administration, at least after amending the protocols, which both the 12 and 16 comparison is after amendments, it looks better.
I wouldn't call that a praise of the process. I would just say it's better.
As someone I know who likes to put it when we talk about the statistic, he says, if the CEC can't do basic math, why should anyone believe them? That's sort of a fair
You
question.
are alive.
I know, it's not something I say, it's something that someone I know says. And so, yeah.
What other data sets have you used are in your practice, like for big scope analysis?
Big scope, I mean, I mainly use survey data. So, let me see what I have open today. So, I'm terribly messy, and so I can answer that with, this is data from a field experiment that CRRC did on marshutkas to see if you tell marshutka drivers that they might be watched, whether they're being safer or not. And I'm still cleaning that data a little bit and trying to figure out a few things, seeing if there's any recording errors. So that's one data set. This is data on the quality of elections internationally, and I was looking at that today because I'm writing something about quality of elections in Armenia and Georgia. This is a training that we had on synthetic matching and genetic matching, or no, the synthetic control method, genetic matching, from Alexis Diamond. He was in town, and he's going to be working with us on a project. He invented those methods, and they're really cool if you're into like statistical stuff and trying to figure out causality without a randomized control trial. Look them up. It's really cool, and maybe we can geek out later over that.
How long is he staying for?
He's in Budapest right now. He might have a visit to country at some point. But yeah, he's actually extremely good at explaining complicated things. He made both of those two things look extremely simple. Like Taylor was at those trainings. She's just looking like, yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
When I was here.
It was amazing.
I really understood things.
Yeah.
After that I went downhill, but while he was here, it was very, very good.
We want to meet him as well.
Yeah, he's a really cool guy. This is Caucasus Barometer 2015, something I was looking at with ethnicity. This is still open because I copy and paste from it. It's from my master's thesis. It's about a quasi-experimental regression discontinuity design and whether attacking public opinion pollsters really works. And this is 2016 Transparency International survey on public policy issues, and I'm looking at something I'm writing about how women are more likely to use drugs without a prescription in Georgia. And it just holds everywhere. So it's worse in rural settlements, but men across the country, it's statistically identical, that about 20% of them say that they've used drugs without a prescription from their doctor, whereas everywhere else, where women, it's more, and then it increases in urban, non-capital, and then even more in rural settings. Also increases with age, but for men, it's again a flat line where it's about 20%, 20%, 20% of each age group. And that's what I work on in our mainly survey data.
Do you mainly use R or other statistical programs as well?
Use R mainly. Some of the survey stuff is a bit of a pain. It depends what you're doing though. But if I just need frequencies with weights on them, I'll use SPSS because You can click 5 buttons and have tables from almost the entire data set. And that's sort of convenient if you're just working with frequencies. Yep.
As a person who was very, very late, I want to ask what all this witchcraft is for. I mean,
All what?
I mean, all of what you have just talked about from the 5th slide or 10th slide, I missed the beginning and what for is this in terms of elections? Because I understand already understand, I mean, how does PVT works. I understand now how the exit polls work. I understand the difference, how statistics work in them, this whole models, but I fail to understand all of these your models. I mean, for what do you need them? You can predict the results, or
No, so the idea here is you're looking to see if the patterns are what you would expect if unmanipulated, or if they don't have the patterns that you would expect when manipulated. So generally numbers have a number of patterns to them. There's lots and lots of patterns to them actually. And when people mess with them, those numbers artificially, those patterns don't hold a lot of the time.
you mean messing with the turnout?
In this case, with election returns and the number of votes. So turnout, yes, but
The voter turnout.
voter turnout. But it's not messing with voter turnout, it's increasing the number of ballots because those would go across in certain areas. And so the test that I did today, you can also do with particular parties, right? And so if you get a high number for one party and a low number for another party, then they're competitors, it might suggest some sort of manipulation or malfeasance.
Have you tried doing that?
No, lack of time. I'm
Afraid of what you'll find.
No, I'm actually not afraid of what I'll find. I'm pretty sure that
You did
it'll be the same thing, probably.
There is a question. Whether could you say something about turnout versus votes for party correlation?
I mean, I don't know. It depends on context. So interpretation of these numbers is super context dependent, and it requires substantive judgment. Some people prefer that, and I think that the best way is both, because you can look at the turnout numbers to see if they're strange, as well as parties individually. And then you can compare the parties, but
That would be more interesting.
well, due to limited time resources,
Will you do that for fun?
I would do that for fun the next time that I have a day off.
No, not for the fun, but actually, as you might know, for 2016, there has gone a serious redistrictization.
Yeah.
This complex word, and it would be super interesting to look at. We do not have anymore the Kazbegi district. Now it is unified in.
So a colleague of mine already did that, and that's a different thing, right?
Okay.
So you're talking about what's called gerrymandering, yeah?
Well, no, it wasn't gerrymandering. I'm calling it. I mean, that's what the Constitutional Court ruled, and that's how the borders of districts were.
They ruled that it was constitutional.
Delimited. But so it would be interesting the turnouts from from your observation of the previous elections and the comparison between the newer.
That's a little bit different from what I'm doing.
Okay.
But a colleague of mine did that, and he said that it didn't have any effect. The redistricting would have gotten the same result, or Georgian Dream would have won more seats.
With the older.
With the old redistricting.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What is his name?
I'll tell you when we're not online, because I don't want to attribute anything to anyone.
Okay. So the thing is, I teach in university, and my subject is electoral systems and legislation.
Yeah.
So what have you manifested here is beyond my understanding, and so I feel like my students do when I explain to them this whole new terminology. So I would like to concentrate more on that sometime later with you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I'm done, guys.
Thank you for doing that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's get some beer.